Have you ever noticed that every time you try to change your life, something seems to pull you back into the same destructive habits? You begin with strong motivation, but suddenly, almost without noticing, you end up right where you started. And the most frustrating part is that it keeps happening repeatedly, as if you're trapped in an endless loop, undermining your own progress. But here's what often goes unspoken. That resistance isn't simply about lacking discipline or willpower. It comes from a hidden part of your mind. Carl Jung studied this deeply and warned, until you become aware of it, real change won't happen. The good news is, there is a way forward. In this video, I'm going to show you how to recognize and take control of the invisible force that has been affecting your self-discipline, your productivity, and even your relationships. If you're ready to finally break free from this cycle of self-sabotage, stay with me until the end. Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try to change, something keeps pulling you back to your old patterns? As if there's an unseen force working behind the scenes, slowing your progress. For many, this isn't just frustrating, it becomes discouraging. The desire to change is there. The effort is real, yet something within resists. The cycle of self-sabotage tends to follow a predictable pattern. It often begins with dissatisfaction. Whether it's about your body, your productivity, your relationships, or another area of life. That dissatisfaction creates a desire for change, usually combined with a surge of motivation. That's when you decide it's time. You make plans, set goals, and commit to new habits. The first few days or weeks feel promising. That sense of control builds confidence, and it seems like things are finally aligning. But then, something begins to shift. The routine starts to feel heavy. The effort that once felt exciting begins to feel like a burden. Small slips appear. You skip a workout, delay an important task, or fall back into habits you thought you had left behind. Your mind begins to create excuses. Today was difficult, just this once. But that just this once repeats itself. And before you realize it, you're back where you started. The real issue isn't only returning to old habits. It's the emotional impact of that setback. Each failure brings frustration. Frustration leads to guilt, and guilt leads to discouragement. A sense of powerlessness begins to take over. Often you start to believe that maybe change isn't possible. I understand that struggle. For years, I was caught in a continuous cycle of failed attempts to improve. I had strong ambitions. I wanted to be more disciplined, more productive, more focused. I wanted to build something meaningful and truly transform my life. But no matter how hard I tried, it always felt like something was pulling me backward. The pattern was always the same. I would feel dissatisfied, look at myself, and decide, starting today, everything will change. And in the beginning, it did. I would wake up early, organize my schedule, avoid distractions, and follow a plan with full commitment. For a few weeks, it felt like I finally had control over my life. Then, unexpectedly, I would begin to lose momentum. One night, I would go to bed later than planned. The next day, I would delay an important task. Social media, something I had decided to avoid, would slowly return. Workouts that once felt essential would start getting skipped. I would tell myself I was only pausing my progress. But deep down, I knew I was falling back into old habits. And when I realized I had returned to the same starting point, the frustration was intense. I kept asking myself, why does this keep happening? Why can't I stay consistent, even when I know what to do? The most difficult part was the feeling of powerlessness. I saw others succeeding, People who seemed to have strong willpower, who committed to something and followed through. Meanwhile, I kept repeating the same mistakes. Over time, my belief in my ability to change started to fade. I began to think that maybe I wasn't disciplined enough, that maybe I didn't have what it takes to truly transform my life. That was when I decided to explore the teachings of Carl Jung more deeply. If willpower alone wasn't enough, then something within me must have been working against me. Something unseen, yet powerful. Through studying Jung's ideas, I realized that within each of us exists a hidden part of the mind, a collection of repressed impulses, beliefs, and emotions that operate without our awareness. Suddenly, everything started to make sense. The problem was never a lack of motivation or discipline. The real obstacle had always been within me, in the unconscious patterns influencing my actions. The mind naturally resists change, even when the change is positive. My brain kept me tied to familiar habits because that's what it recognized. That resistance wasn't a personal failure. It was a psychological mechanism designed to keep me within what felt safe and known. I came to understand that if I truly wanted to change, simply wanting it more or trying harder wouldn't be enough. I needed to understand what was holding me back. That realization became a turning point. Instead of seeing myself as someone lacking discipline, I began to investigate the hidden processes influencing my behavior. And what I discovered was unexpected. Everything I had labeled as weakness, laziness, procrastination, lack of motivation, wasn't weakness at all. It was a symptom of something deeper, and that deeper force had a name. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden part of the mind where fears, insecurities, and limiting beliefs are stored. As I explored this concept, my perspective began to change. I realized that my self-sabotage wasn't random. It had a structure, a reason behind it. But before understanding how it works, it's important to recognize one thing. Overcoming self-sabotage doesn't mean you will never experience internal resistance again. The difference lies not in eliminating resistance, but in learning how to respond to it. And once you begin to understand how your shadow operates, you start to see that you have far more control over your life than you once believed. The shadow develops over time. From childhood, we learn what is acceptable and what is not, what we are allowed to express and what must be suppressed. If a child shows anger or frustration, they may be told it is wrong. If they act freely in a formal situation, they may be corrected. Gradually, they learn that certain parts of themselves are not welcome. But those parts don't disappear. They are pushed into the unconscious. The shadow is not only a place for negative traits. In many cases, it also contains qualities that could be valuable and empowering. However, because we have learned to hide them, they tend to surface indirectly. One of those ways is through self-sabotage. Whenever we attempt to grow, change, or move beyond what is familiar, we encounter the shadow. It carries fears, insecurities, and beliefs shaped over time. For example, if someone grows up believing they are not good enough, the shadow will continue reinforcing that belief. Even if they have the ability to succeed, that internal voice can hold them back. If someone has been taught that ambition is wrong, that hidden part of the mind may block their progress without them realizing it. And this process is often subtle. At first, change feels easy. Motivation is high, energy is strong, and there is confidence that this time will be different. But then, unexpectedly, energy drops. Motivation fades. Distractions appear. Time seems to slip away. Something within starts creating reasons to delay or give up. What once felt like a clear and structured plan for transformation slowly weakens under a series of quiet justifications. The shadow does not act openly. It operates in the background, influencing thoughts and emotions without conscious awareness. A person may spend years trying to understand why they struggle to maintain habits, never realizing that a hidden part of their mind is resisting that change. And this resistance can take different forms. Sometimes it appears as procrastination, the urge to delay important actions without a clear reason. At other times, it shows up as strong self-criticism, that inner voice saying, "Why even try?" It can also manifest in repeated patterns, such as consistently entering unhealthy relationships or leaving projects unfinished halfway through. The conscious mind wants to move forward, but the shadow pulls it back. This happens because the shadow represents the comfort zone, the familiar. Even when someone feels unhappy with their life, repeating what they already know feels safer than stepping into the unknown. To the unconscious mind, change is perceived as a threat. And whenever a threat appears, the shadow steps in to protect the person, even if that protection ends up holding them back. The more the shadow is ignored, the stronger it becomes. It operates like a hidden program running in the background, shaping decisions. He's creating unseen obstacles and influencing outcomes without awareness. Self-sabotage is not a lack of discipline or effort. It reflects an internal conflict between the conscious desire to change and unconscious forces that try to keep everything the same. The solution is not to fight the shadow. Anything we resist in the unconscious tends to grow stronger. The real path is to recognize this hidden part and bring it into awareness. Only by facing the shadow can we prevent it from quietly controlling our choices. If the shadow works behind the scenes, influencing decisions without awareness, then the first step to overcoming it is recognizing its presence. But this is not easy. Because this part of the psyche was pushed into the unconscious, it does not appear in obvious ways. Instead, it reveals itself through repetitive patterns that seem to lack logic. A person may decide to improve their health, but constantly find reasons to avoid exercise. They may want to be more productive, but feel blocked whenever they try to start an important task. They may say they want a healthy relationship, yet repeatedly choose partners who reinforce past wounds. None of this happens randomly. The unconscious builds defense mechanisms to keep the shadow out of awareness. However, this protection comes with a cost. It keeps the individual trapped in cycles that limit growth. For Carl Jung, bringing the shadow into awareness requires self-observation, paying attention to recurring problems and questioning their origin. But Jung was not the only thinker to explore this idea. Soren Kierkegaard, one of the early figures in existentialism, described a similar concept, which he called unconscious despair. He believed that many people live in a state of self-deception, avoiding the truth about themselves because facing it would be too painful. Kierkegaard argued that true freedom begins when a person becomes aware of what is holding them back. The key point is this: identifying the shadow requires courage. It is uncomfortable to accept that certain self-destructive behaviors are not just about lack of motivation, but are rooted in something deeper. Seeing the shadow means confronting fears, frustrations, and beliefs that may have been buried for years. This process is not only about reflecting on the past. It also involves recognizing how patterns continue in the present. One way to do this is by paying attention to moments of strong emotional reactions. Whenever something triggers an intense or disproportionate response, it often signals that a repressed part of you is trying to surface. Another method is observing projections. When you strongly judge or criticize others, it may reflect something you have rejected within yourself. For example, If someone feels irritated by confident individuals, it could be because they were taught that expressing confidence is wrong. If they feel envy towards someone who takes risks, it may point to a hidden fear of taking risks themselves. The shadow does not appear directly, but it always leaves traces. Identifying it is not about self-blame. It is a process of freedom. Imagine walking through a long, dark hallway filled with closed doors. Behind each door is a part of you that has been locked away over time. Some doors hold repressed anger. Others contain talents you never allowed yourself to develop. Some hide fears you tried to forget. You may have always known those doors existed, but avoided opening them. The problem is that ignoring them does not remove their influence. The shadow does not disappear simply because it remains unseen. In fact, when left in the dark, it operates independently, without control or awareness. What Carl Jung suggested was not to destroy this hidden part, but to face it, to open those doors and understand what lies behind them. Integrating the shadow means becoming whole, reconnecting with the parts of yourself that were once rejected. So how can this be done in practice? The first experience when facing the shadow is often discomfort. It is like turning on a light in a basement filled with years of clutter. At first, the dust rises, and the mess feels overwhelming. But gradually, your vision adjusts. Jung described this as making the unconscious conscious. It is not just about knowing the shadow exists. It is about learning how to engage with it. One effective method is reflective writing. Instead of avoiding uncomfortable thoughts, write them down as if you are having a conversation with your own mind. Ask questions like, what am I avoiding? Why does this affect me so strongly? What is this part of me trying to communicate? This inner dialogue can reveal the fears and mental blocks behind self-sabotage. There is another side of the shadow that often goes unnoticed. It does not only contain what we fear, it also holds what we deeply desire. Many of the qualities we admire in others, but believe are out of reach, may actually exist within us, hidden in the shadow, waiting to be expressed. For instance, someone who envies a confident person may actually be suppressing their own desire for self-expression. Friedrich Nietzsche explored this idea through the concept of the free spirit, a person who lives authentically and fully, without being limited by external judgment. He argued that many people spend their lives trying to fit into roles shaped by society, while their true nature remains hidden. Integrating the shadow is not only a process of healing, it is also a process of liberation. When you recognize what you have rejected, you begin to reclaim parts of yourself that hold real strength. Repressed anger can transform into determination. Fear can become awareness. Hidden desires can turn into meaningful action. Ultimately, opening the doors of your mind requires courage. Growth cannot happen without facing what has been left behind. But when you do, something shifts. You gain the ability to live without fearing your own nature. Understanding the shadow is an important step, but real change comes through practice. Carl Jung once said that enlightenment does not come from imagining light, but from making the darkness conscious. In simple terms, recognizing unconscious patterns is not enough. You must actively face them to stop them from influencing your life. One useful approach is gradual exposure. The unconscious mind resists change because it sees the unknown as a threat. Many people try to change too quickly, forcing new behaviors and creating even stronger resistance. A more effective method is introducing change in small steps. If fear of failure is strong, the goal should not be perfection, but allowing small mistakes without harsh judgment. If procrastination is the issue, instead of trying to complete everything at once, Begin with just a few minutes of focused effort. The unconscious mind needs time to adapt before it fully accepts change. Daily habits also play a major role in shaping the mind. Self-sabotage often appears through automatic routines repeated without awareness. This is where the idea of habit reversal becomes useful. Atomic Habits explains that a common mistake is focusing only on building new habits without removing the triggers of old ones. For example, if someone wants to reduce time spent on social media, simply deciding to use the phone less is not enough. A more effective strategy is changing the environment, removing apps or keeping the phone out of reach. Jung also believed that the unconscious responds to symbolic actions. Changing your external environment sends a signal of transformation to your inner world. Another important method is behavioral activation, a psychological principle based on the idea that action comes before motivation. Many people wait until they feel ready before taking action. But the reality is that the mind only begins to adapt to a new identity once the body has already started behaving in alignment with it. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is revealed through lived experience, not through pure rational thinking alone. So instead of waiting for motivation or the right energy to arrive, the first step is simply to act, no matter how small. If you need to begin a project, just open a document and write anything. If your goal is fitness, simply put on your workout clothes and go for a short walk. These small, repeated actions gradually reshape the unconscious so it can accept the new identity you are forming. Another highly effective method is the technique of opposite action. Self-sabotage often runs on autopilot, avoiding difficulty, delaying tasks, or giving in to fear. But when you deliberately do the opposite of that impulse, you interrupt unconscious patterns. If the mind says, "Do it later," you act immediately. If the shadow pushes you to avoid someone due to insecurity, you start the conversation instead. Carl Jung described this as challenging inner archetypes so they no longer control your psychological behavior. Meditation and mindfulness are also essential tools for shadow integration. The unconscious appears through automatic thoughts, impulses, and repressed emotions. Simply observing these experiences without reacting to them reduces their influence. Jung viewed meditation as a way to create a direct connection with the unconscious, allowing it to express itself without resistance. Through mindful awareness, you learn to notice when the shadow is influencing you, without automatically obeying it. Another practical method is the unfinished tasks list. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming a psychologically whole person, involves integrating fragmented parts of the psyche. On a practical level, this fragmentation shows up in small promises we make to ourselves but fail to complete. Every unfinished task or abandoned project represents a minor break in identity. Creating a list of these loose ends and completing them one by one becomes a symbolic act of reintegration. While these techniques can be used individually, it is important to recognize that the unconscious is deep and complex. Jung dedicated his life to studying the human psyche and understood that some patterns are too difficult to face alone. Seeking support from a professional, such as a therapist, psychoanalyst, or psychologist, can significantly speed up the process and help uncover layers of the shadow that may be invisible on your own. Self-knowledge is a continuous journey, and guidance can make it more effective. Integrating the shadow is not only about stopping self-sabotage. It is a path towards psychological freedom. When you learn to recognize inner resistance and apply structured methods to work through it, you are no longer controlled by unconscious patterns. You become the active author of your life. Real change is not a single moment. It is an ongoing process. Many people believe that one powerful realization can transform everything instantly, as if a single decision could rebuild habits, beliefs, and behavior. In reality, transformation is gradual and built through consistent awareness and daily action. Integrating the shadow is not the end. It is the beginning of a deeper process. Once you become aware of what was hidden, a new question arises. What do you do with that awareness? It is not enough to recognize patterns or understand your limitations. The real challenge is turning insight into action. One solution is internal coherence. Many people struggle to change because there is a conflict between their desired identity and their lived behavior. They want to be disciplined, but still see themselves as procrastinators. They want success, but hold beliefs that associate success with negativity or pressure. The mind resists change when identity remains attached to the past. That is why lasting transformation begins by rebuilding identity from within, rather than forcing external habits. The key is to start acting as the person you want to become. Instead of thinking, "I am lazy and need to change," you begin to behave like a disciplined person in practice. This idea is supported not only by modern psychology, but also by classical philosophy. Aristotle famously stated, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, in his view, is not an inborn trait, but a habit formed through repetition. Identity, therefore, is not fixed. It is shaped through consistent action over time. True change happens in small decisions. Every moment you choose a new behavior instead of the old pattern reinforces a new version of yourself. Each small success, even if it seems minor, strengthens the identity you are building. However, real transformation requires patience. Many people quit because they expect fast and dramatic results, without understanding that change is gradual. Integrating the shadow, reshaping habits, and building identity all take time. The most common mistake is assuming that setbacks mean returning to zero. In reality, failure is part of the process. Growth is never linear. There will be ups and downs, moments of doubt, and temporary setbacks. And what separates those who change from those who remain stuck is not perfection, but persistence, continuing forward despite mistakes. Ultimately, self-knowledge is not a philosophical luxury. It is essential for anyone who wants to live authentically and free from self-sabotage. True transformation does not come from eliminating flaws, but from integrating them, understanding them, and growing through them. Self-sabotage traps many people in repeating cycles without awareness. Most try to change through willpower alone, but the real limitation lies in unconscious patterns that shape behavior. Carl Jung showed that what we do not recognize within ourselves continues to control us. Only by becoming aware of resistance and confronting the shadow can we regain control over our lives. If you have reached this point, you have already taken an important step toward self-awareness. Understanding the shadow, identifying self-sabotaging patterns, and applying practical techniques can significantly change how you approach growth and challenges. It improves discipline and focus, but more importantly, it creates a sense of freedom, because you stop fighting yourself and start working with your own mind. But real change only happens through action. No technique is effective unless it is applied. Choose one exercise from this process and begin today. It could be a small adjustment in your routine, a change in your environment, or a simple conscious habit. The key is to start. Now the question is, what was your biggest insight from this video? Share it in the comments. If you are ready to face your shadow, then write, "I am ready to face my shadow." And if this message resonated with you, subscribe, turn on notifications, and like the video. This supports the channel and ensures you stay updated with future content on psychology, self-awareness, and personal development. See you in the next video.